If you are tuning in today, it means you're looking for the signal in the noise.
You want to understand the currents shaping our culture.
Exactly. You want the deep context, and you aren't afraid to look at multiple perspectives to get those aha moments.
The ones that really challenge how you see things.
Right. And today's deep dive is definitely going to challenge you. We are examining a topic that is, well, it's incredibly provocative.
Highly polarizing.
Yeah, and just massively culturally significant right now. But before we get into the meat of this analysis, I have a really quick request.
Always got to pay the bills right.
You know it. Please make sure to like and subscribe to the show right now so you never miss one of these explorations.
It really helps us out.
It does. So today we are conducting a comprehensive cover-to-cover review of a brand new ebook. It's called Against the Heresy
Men as Defenders of Divine Order and Truth
by Conrad Riker. We're going to break down the entire text, but if you want to follow along or read it for yourself, head over to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books to buy the book.
And make sure you follow the author on Substack.
Right. His handle is @Conrad Riker on Substack. It's a really dense, uncompromising manifesto, and our mission today is to unpack its core arguments.
But before we get into the actual mechanics of the text, we really have to establish a crucial baseline for you, the listener.
A mandatory disclaimer, basically.
Exactly. This book contains highly politically charged content. I mean, it is explicitly written for a men's rights activist audience.
Specifically catering to red-pilled manosphere men.
Right. Men who are trying to understand the history of our modern institutions before they were, in the author's view anyway, captured by feminists and Marxists.
So we need to be crystal clear with you here.
We are not taking sides.
At all.
We are not endorsing the viewpoints of the author, nor are we endorsing feminism or Marxism.
Our job today is strictly anthropological.
Yeah, we're just here to impartially report on the ideas contained in the source material to help you understand Conrad Riker's worldview.
The intellectual frameworks he uses,
and exactly why his arguments are resonating so intensely with his specific audience.
I am glad we set those parameters up front. We're here to analyze the text, to look at the architecture of the argument itself.
So let's start with the foundation.
Okay, let's unpack this. The central premise against the heresy is Riker's assertion that modern institutions have been systematically captured.
And dismantled.
Right, dismantled by cultural Marxists and feminists, leading to what he calls a devastating crisis of masculinity.
And his ultimate call to action is for men to wake up from this cultural conditioning.
To reclaim what he describes as their historical divine roles.
As leaders, protectors, and builders of civilization.
Yeah, and he doesn't ease the reader into this concept at all.
No, the very first chapter hits you with a barrage of statistics.
Really grim numbers meant to paint a picture of a modern landscape where men are profoundly suffering.
He wants to establish right away that this isn't just some philosophical dorm room debate.
It's a matter of life and death for him.
So let's look at those numbers.
Riker leads by pointing out that in 2020, the male suicide rate in the United States was 3.88 times higher than that of women.
Almost 4 times higher.
And he highlights a 60% spike in male suicide since the year 2000 alone.
That is a staggering jump in just 2 decades.
On top of the mortality rates, he cites an American Psychological Association study stating that 45% of men report feeling lonely.
Almost half of all men.
Right. And he frames this not just as a statistical anomaly, but as a literal scream for help from a demographic that he claims society is actively ignoring.
Or worse, mocking. Which leads us directly into a core concept of the book.
The toxic trap.
The toxic trap, yes. Riker argues that these alarming statistics are the direct measurable result of society placing modern men in an impossible psychological double bind.
How so?
Well, he posits that on one hand, men are shamed for their natural masculine traits.
Things like aggression, the desire to lead, stoicism, territoriality.
Competitiveness. Society broadly labels all these inherent traits as toxic.
Right, we hear the phrase toxic masculinity all the time.
Exactly. But on the other hand, society demands that men become more emotionally open and vulnerable.
So wait, if society is telling them to be vulnerable, why does Riker think it's a trap? Where is the disconnect between what society says it wants and what it actually rewards?
Riker argues that the disconnect is total hypocrisy.
Okay.
He claims that when men actually do attempt to show vulnerability, they are subtly or sometimes overtly demonized and despised by the very people who told them to open up.
He uses media portrayal as a mirror for this.
He does. He asks you to really think about the last time you saw a male character in a modern movie or a TV show break down in tears or express deep fear.
Is that character ever portrayed as a hero?
Never. He's immediately coded as someone who has less control.
Someone weak or someone who needs to be saved by a stronger character?
Riker argues that modern society's demand for male vulnerability is often just weakness dressed up in therapy speak.
Men are told to open up, but the moment they do, they lose the respect of their partners, their peers, and their communities.
And it leaves men confused, paralyzed, and ultimately deeply aimless.
And the consequences of that aimlessness are severe.
Very. Riker points out that men are hardwired for a mission.
When they drift through life without a clear, defined purpose, when they're told that their natural drive to conquer and build is toxic, they become incredibly easy targets.
Targets for addiction, depression, and ultimately societal decay.
To illustrate this, he shares an extensive anecdote about a man he calls John.
John's story is really positioned as the archetype for the modern man.
Riker details how John was caught squarely in this toxic trap. He was told by his corporate job and his social circles that his natural instincts to protect, provide, and take charge were antiquated and overbearing.
So he internalized this shame,
He stopped making decisions, he deferred to everyone else, and he ended up utterly aimless.
struggling with his identity and leaning heavily on alcohol to numb the cognitive dissonance.
But Riker doesn't leave John there at rock bottom.
No, he frames John's story as a redemption arc. It's a roadmap for the reader.
John didn't escape this trap by going to more therapy to talk about his feelings.
According to Riker, John escaped by reclaiming his identity through two things: faith and a very specific definition of emotional intelligence.
Right, because Riker's definition of emotional intelligence is very different from the mainstream definition.
It's not about being in touch with your sadness.
For Riker, emotional intelligence means self-mastery.
It's the ability to feel anger or frustration, but channel it into productive, disciplined action, rather than lashing out or shutting down.
Exactly. John adopted a renewed sense of purpose not by becoming less masculine, but by balancing his inherent strength with strict self-awareness.
He stepped up. He took charge as the unapologetic leader in his family and his community, proving to Riker's audience that resilience and disciplined self-awareness can shatter that double bind.
So once Riker establishes this modern crisis and the personal toll it takes on men like John, he shifts focus to the intellectual frameworks required to actually break out of this societal conditioning on a macro level.
He calls this the red pill awakening.
The terminology here is vital. Riker heavily utilizes the Matrix metaphor.
The idea of taking the red pill to wake up from a simulated false reality.
Now, the red pill has obviously become a massive part of internet subcultures, specifically dating and manosphere forums, like the old Reddit, the red pill community.
But Riker explicitly wants to elevate the concept far beyond internet dating strategies.
Yeah, he frames it as a modern-day Gnostic awakening.
Can you break that down? Because he uses that term Gnostic quite a bit, and I want to make sure we understand exactly what he means in this context.
It's a fascinating philosophical pull.
Gnosticism was an ancient religious movement that believed the material world we live in is actually a flawed, false creation.
Designed to keep human souls trapped and ignorant of the true, higher divine reality.
Right, the only way to escape is through gnosis, or secret, profound knowledge.
And Riker applies this directly to modern politics.
Taking the red pill for him is a Gnostic awakening, where a man suddenly sees through the illusions of cultural Marxism.
He realizes the culture he lives in is a deliberate lie designed to suppress it.
And he wakes up to recognize a higher divine truth. He even echoes St. Andrew, framing this awakening as a total rejection of worldly falsehoods in favor of eternal divine order.
To build this framework for the reader, Riker synthesizes the work of several intellectual heavyweights who he believes are the modern prophets of this awakening.
The first and perhaps most prominent in the cultural zeitgeist is Jordan Peterson.
Riker describes reading Peterson's 12 Rules for Life like a bolt of lightning to his soul.
He saw Peterson as a genuinely masculine figure, speaking unapologetic truth in a world drowning in relativistic lies.
But Riker actually digs much deeper into Peterson's earlier, far more academic work, Maps of Meaning.
Yes, he focuses heavily on Peterson's exploration of the hero's journey.
In Maps of Meaning, Peterson outlines how myths across all cultures tell the story of a hero who must leave safety, confront the chaos of the unknown,
Often symbolized as a dragon.
and bring back order to his community. Riker uses this as a literal blueprint for personal transformation.
The modern man must slay the dragon of modern cultural conditioning.
Riker also dedicates several pages to a very specific pop culture moment. Jordan Peterson's famous Channel 4 news interview with British journalist Kathy Newman.
Why does this specific interview hold so much weight for Riker?
because he views it as the ultimate modern example of a man stepping into the lion's den of the mainstream feminist narrative, armed purely with logic and truth.
During that interview, Newman repeatedly tried to frame Peterson's arguments about gender and hierarchy in the worst possible light.
Using the famous phrasing. So what you're saying is,
But Peterson never lost his cool.
he remained unapologetic, highly articulate, assertive, and totally unafraid to speak his mind without bowing an inch to political correctness.
Riker views that specific broadcast as a massive red pill moment for millions of men watching.
It proved that the dominant cultural narrative could be dismantled in real time by a man who refused to apologize for his worldview.
Another fascinating figure he introduces to support his thesis is Warren Farrell.
Now, Farrell's a really unique case study here because he didn't start out in the manosphere at all.
He was actually a staunch, high-level supporter of second-wave feminism.
And that's what makes him such a powerful rhetorical tool for Riker.
Warren Farrell literally served on the board of directors for the National Organization for Women in New York.
He was deeply embedded in the feminist establishment.
But as he looked closer at the data regarding suicide, workplace deaths, and child custody, Farrell eventually saw what he believed were fundamental flaws in the ideology.
He realized, in his view, that the movement had become more about securing power and victimhood status than actual equality.
So Farrell writes this totally paradigm-shifting book called The Myth of Male Power.
And in it, he exposes how society actually treats men as the disposable sex.
He points out that while feminists focus on the glass ceiling for top female executives, they ignore the glass cellar.
The glass cellar. The fact that men make up almost all workplace fatalities, combat deaths, and dangerous manual labor jobs.
Farrell's journey is held up by Riker as the ultimate testament to the power of the red pill.
Here is a man deep inside the feminist system who woke up, looked at the raw data, and realized that men were being systematically harmed and left adrift.
Riker then transitions from psychology and sociology to the political landscape, specifically framing the 2016 election of Donald Trump as a massive cultural turning point.
Regardless of Trump's specific policies, Riker argues that the election was a primal scream from men across the country.
Men who were tired of being vilified, told they were toxic and emasculated by the media.
The book presents Trump as a highly symbolic figure. Men voted for someone who unabashedly rejected the feminist and politically correct narratives that had dominated culture for decades.
Trump, in Riker's analysis, was a leader who wasn't afraid to be aggressive, to fight back, and to completely ignore the rules of cultural Marxism.
But this is where the book takes an unexpected and incredibly dense intellectual turn.
Riker transitions from politics into high-level theoretical physics and philosophy to ground his arguments in something beyond human culture.
He introduces a concept called the CTMU.
The cognitive theoretic model of the universe.
This was developed by a man named Christopher Langan, who is famous for having an incredibly high IQ, reportedly around 195.
What's fascinating here is, just to put that in perspective, Einstein's is estimated to have been around 160.
So we are talking about profound cognitive processing power.
But this seems like a wild leap. How on earth does Riker connect theoretical physics and cosmology to the crisis of masculinity and gender roles?
It requires a bit of an explain it like I'm five breakdown because Langan's theory is notoriously complex.
Essentially, the CTMU posits that reality is not just dead matter bumping into itself by accident.
Instead, reality is a self-simulation or a self-processing language.
Think of the universe as a giant cosmic mind that is constantly computing itself in order to realize its own potential.
Because it is a mind, the universe has an inherent logical structure.
A teleology, or a purpose. It is designed by a divine creator, and humans are a structural part of that divine plan.
Okay, I follow the physics analogy. The universe is a purposeful simulation. But how does that apply to men and women?
Riker uses this highly complex model to give his readers a strictly logical, almost mathematical framework for their divine purpose.
If the universe is an orchestrated logical simulation with a divine order, then biological dimorphism, the existence of men and women, isn't just an evolutionary accident or a malleable social construct.
It is a fundamental structural component of reality itself.
Men and women are designed with specific complementary functions to keep the universe's meaning moving forward.
Understanding the CTMU, according to Riker, proves that when men fulfill their roles as leaders and protectors, they aren't just conforming to 1950s stereotypes.
They are perfectly aligning themselves with the fundamental divine physics of the universe.
That is a staggering way to frame it. He's taking the argument out of the realm of culture wars and trying to root it in cosmic law.
He gives a rigid intellectual backing to his spiritual concepts.
Once he establishes this massive internal and cosmic awakening, the book shifts its lens outward.
Part 3 is where Riker details what he views as the active battlefield.
He goes into great depth about the war on men and the deliberate dismantling of institutions.
He points directly to cultural Marxism as the primary threat, and he traces its origins back to a very specific group.
The Frankfurt School.
We hear the term cultural Marxism thrown around a lot in political discourse today, often as a buzzword.
How does Riker actually define it, and who were the Frankfurt School?
The Frankfurt School was a group of early 20th century Marxist intellectuals thinkers like Herbert Marcuse and Max Horkheimer.
Originally, traditional Marxism was all about economics, the working class overthrowing the wealthy capitalists.
But when the working class in Western Europe and America didn't revolt, the Frankfurt School adapted the theory.
They shifted the focus from economics to culture.
They developed critical theory, which essentially views all of society, history, and culture through the lens of power dynamics and oppressor versus oppressed.
Riker argues that these thinkers deliberately laid the intellectual groundwork to deconstruct the foundational pillars of Western society.
The family, religion, and traditional gender roles.
Their goal, he claims, was to destroy the traditional hierarchy, to create a homogenized, perfectly equal society.
But Riker posits that this kind of forced cultural equality just means erasing the unique strengths, aggressive energy, and heavy responsibilities that define traditional masculinity.
And he says the most obvious evidence of this Marxist deconstruction is the systematic attack on male spaces.
Exactly. He argues that spaces where men historically bond, challenge each other, strip away their egos, and learn accountability are being explicitly targeted.
A prime example he deconstructs is the Boy Scouts.
Now, a listener might think, what's the big deal? Girls want to learn how to tie knots and build fires too, right? How does Riker frame the inclusion of girls into the Boy Scouts?
Riker views the inclusion of girls not as a victory for equality, but as a total institutional surrender to feminist pressure.
He argues it fundamentally destroys the mechanism of the organization.
Cross-culturally throughout human history, young boys require male-only initiation rituals to transition from boys into men.
They need a space free from the presence of the opposite sex, where they can compete, aggressively fail, be disciplined by older male mentors, and earn their place in a hierarchy.
When you introduce girls into that space, the dynamic instantly changes.
The boys change their behavior to accommodate or impress the girls, and the initiation ritual is shattered.
Riker argues this deprives young men of crucial survival skills and psychological development.
He applies the exact same logic to the university level, specifically looking at college fraternities.
He cites a fascinating 2020 study from the Journal of Men's Studies.
This study found that men who participated in fraternities were 30% more likely to report having a strong, reliable support network later in life compared to non-Greek men.
Yet Riker points out fraternities are constantly under existential threat from university administrations.
He acknowledges that bad behavior happens, but he argues that universities use isolated incidents as a pretext to shut down these organizations entirely.
Under the guise of preventing toxic masculinity.
The real result of this administrative overreach, Riker argues, is leaving young men completely adrift in a sea of campus isolation.
Stripping away vital mentorship, brotherhood, and the networking structures that historically helped young men launch their lives.
But the most dramatic and high-stakes example he gives of this institutional capture is the United States military.
Riker points specifically to the 2015 U.S. military policies that mandated gender-neutral integration across all combat roles.
He cites a comprehensive study by the Center for Military Readiness, which tracked the implementation of these policies.
The findings he highlights are stark.
Units with mixed-gender combat teams experienced a 30% drop in overall effectiveness.
The mechanics of that drop are what Riker focuses on.
The book claims that in order to accommodate women and achieve artificial parity, the military was forced to lower its physical fitness standards.
This in turn led to a decline in unit cohesion.
Men were allegedly forced to compensate for the physical shortcomings of female soldiers in extreme combat simulations, carrying heavier loads to make up the difference.
Riker states bluntly that the military's attempt to enforce a Marxist vision of gender equality directly compromised its sole primary mission:
lethality in defending the nation.
To bring this massive institutional war down to a deeply personal, localized level, Riker shares a story about his own experience trying to help young men in his town.
He describes attending a local community center meeting.
He noticed a lot of young boys from single mother homes hanging around getting into trouble with no male guidance.
So he suggested starting a mentorship program specifically designed for young boys, led by older men focusing on accountability and life skills.
The reaction he received, according to the book, was shockingly hostile.
He wasn't praised for volunteering. Instead, he was immediately labeled problematic by the committee.
A woman at the meeting explicitly accused him of trying to perpetuate toxic masculinity simply because his idea was exclusionary to girls.
For Riker, this wasn't just an annoying meeting. It was a stark, horrifying realization that merely advocating for men, trying to give boys a fighting chance, is now viewed by modern society as an inherent threat that must be shut down.
That anecdote perfectly sets up the next major section of the text.
Because if society views male spaces as a threat, it's because society worships at the altar of equality.
And here's where it gets really interesting.
Part 4 is where Riker tackles the book's most controversial thesis head on.
He explicitly states that gender equality is a dangerous, civilization-destroying lie.
Yes, he completely rejects the modern myth of equality, and instead posits the concept of divine complementarity.
He roots this concept directly in the biblical book of Genesis.
He argues that the order of creation matters. Adam was created first and given explicit dominion over the earth, the command to cultivate and protect it.
Eve was created subsequently as his helper.
Now, Riker is very careful to clarify his semantics here.
He frames this not as a hierarchy of value. He insists repeatedly that women are not less valuable, intelligent, or important than men before God, but it is a strict hierarchy of function.
Think of it like a pilot and a co-pilot, or different vital organs in a body.
They are both essential for survival, but they have completely different jobs.
Riker argues that men are naturally biologically and spiritually inclined to build, protect, and lead, while women possess unique strengths in nurturing social cohesion and support.
When society ignores these fundamental divine differences and tries to enforce a blank slate artificial equality, we create a society that is deeply unbalanced, chaotic, and ultimately unstable.
And he doesn't just rely on theology to make this point. He pulls from a wide array of historical examples to back this up.
He essentially argues that human history is a graveyard of societies that rejected male leadership.
Let's look at those historical examples. He starts with the Minoans, an ancient civilization on the island of Crete.
Now, the Minoans are often idealized by modern historians as a peaceful, highly egalitarian, even female-dominated society centered around a mother goddess.
How does Riker interpret their history?
He points out that while they may have been peaceful, they were eventually completely conquered and wiped out by the Mycenaeans.
A fiercely patriarchal, martial, and male-dominated society.
Riker's takeaway is brutal but simple. A society that does not cultivate aggressive masculine protectors will inevitably be conquered by a society that does.
He then moves to North America, looking at the Iroquois Confederacy.
While possessing strong matriarchal elements where women held significant political veto power, Riker argues that this division of leadership ultimately fragmented the Confederacy through internal power struggles.
Right when they needed unified, decisive martial leadership the most.
He also points to the ultimate historical warning signs, the collapse of the Roman and Byzantine empires.
He argues that we often blame their fall purely on external barbarian invasions.
But Riker argues the external invasions only succeeded because of internal moral decay.
Specifically, a massive loss of masculine virtue.
He argues that as the men in those empires became wealthy, complacent, and overly focused on personal pleasure, luxury, and hedonism rather than their civic and martial duties, the empires hollowed out from the inside.
They lost their protective shell.
And moving much closer to the modern era, he cites the Soviet Union as a prime, bloody example of forced gender equality.
The early Soviet experiment in the 1920s and 30s deliberately tried to dismantle the nuclear family and force women into harsh manual labor roles alongside men in the name of total state equality.
Riker argues this led to massive societal instability, the emasculation of the male workforce plummeting birth rates, and economic decline.
All of which contributed to the regime's ultimate catastrophic collapse.
You cannot force a biological square peg into a Marxist round hole without breaking the society.
To really drive this home for the modern reader, he pivots from ancient history to the hard data on modern American families.
He contrasts the idealized 1950s nuclear family, which he admits had its flaws but insists fundamentally possessed order, with the chaotic family structure we see today.
He cites data from the Pew Research Center, noting that in 1960, 73% of U.S. children lived with two married, heterosexual parents in their first marriage.
Today, that number has plummeted to 46%.
And he links the structural collapse directly to the ideological push for gender equality.
He introduces a concept often referred to as the Nordic paradox.
He points to a 2019 study published in the Journal of Men's Health analyzing countries with the most aggressive state-enforced gender-neutral policies in the world.
Specifically Sweden and Norway.
Despite having total theoretical equality, these countries report significantly higher rates of depression and suicide among men compared to more traditional patriarchal societies.
He also references a London School of Economics study linking high levels of societal gender equality to correspondingly higher levels of divorce and single-parent households.
For Riker, the data is undeniable. It proves that dismantling the traditional family structure, where the man unequivocally provides, leads, and the woman nurtures and supports, is a recipe for societal freefall and psychological misery for everyone involved.
He places a massive amount of blame for this societal conditioning on media propaganda.
He argues that Hollywood isn't just making entertainment, they are actively engineering culture.
He critiques massive pop culture hits like The Marvelous Mrs. Maisel, Big Little Lies, and even the fantasy epic Game of Thrones.
I found his analysis of Game of Thrones particularly interesting. How does a show about dragons relate to his thesis?
He argues these shows are deliberate propaganda.
In the case of Mrs. Maisel or Big Little Lies, the narrative constantly pushes the idea that women don't need men.
That husbands are either buffoons, oppressors, or deadweight.
But with Game of Thrones, he looks at it as a visual representation of the chaos, extreme violence, and societal ruin that erupts when traditional gender roles and lines of succession are disrupted.
And women vie for masculine martial power.
He believes this constant multi-billion-dollar media bombardment conditions the subconscious of society to view traditional masculinity as outdated, harmful, and inherently toxic.
Which brings us to the most intense section of the book, Part 5.
Riker elevates this entire cultural, political, and historical struggle to the level of a literal cosmic spiritual battle.
He argues that the infiltration of cultural Marxism hasn't just captured secular institutions like the military and universities.
It has deeply, perhaps fatally infected the church itself.
He shares a really striking, deeply personal story to illustrate this capture.
He talks about attending a Sunday service at a mainline Protestant church.
During the sermon, the female pastor began actively dismissing the biblical concept of male headship.
Framing it not as divine order, but as a relic of ancient patriarchal oppression that the modern church needed to evolve past.
Riker describes his reaction vividly. He physically stood up and walked out of the sanctuary in the middle of the sermon.
He saw this not just as a difference of theological opinion, but as feminist theology actively twisting scripture.
He cites 1 Timothy 2.1, I do not permit a woman to teach or to assume authority over a man, she must be quiet.
And argues that by ignoring this explicit command, the church has totally abandoned its divine order and capitulated to the culture.
And the broader statistics he uses support his profound feeling of isolation within the modern church.
He references a 2019 Barna Group study, which found that an astonishing 52% of mainline pastors now support using gender-neutral language for God.
Rather than referring to God explicitly as Father.
For Riker, removing the masculine identity of God is the ultimate blasphemy.
He calls this a stark departure from biblical truth and a sign of terminal spiritual entropy.
He connects this theological softening to the actual demographics in the pews.
He points to research from the Pew Research Center showing a rapidly widening gap in church attendance.
With only 37% of men attending weekly, compared to 44% of women.
The mainstream narrative often claims men are just less spiritual or lazier.
But Riker argues the exact opposite. Men aren't leaving because they are lazy. They are leaving because progressive therapeutic theology has completely emasculated the church.
The church no longer calls men to a dangerous, demanding mission. It just asks them to be nice, making men feel entirely purposeless.
He even points out how pop culture normalizes this spiritual decay on a subconscious level.
He uses the TV show Lucifer as a prime example, where the literal devil is portrayed as a charming, handsome, misunderstood anti-hero who runs a nightclub and helps the police.
Riker sees this as the insidious normalization of evil.
It's satanic symbolism subtly broadcast into millions of living rooms to slowly erode society's moral compass and blur the lines between ultimate good and ultimate evil.
So if the institutions are captured, the media's propaganda, and the church is compromised, how does a man fight this spiritual battle?
Where does he look for a model?
Riker points to the past, holding up the Knights Templar as the ultimate historical archetype for the modern man.
He doesn't just view the Templars as cool guys with swords. He views them as the pinnacle of the spiritual warrior.
They were monks who fought.
They successfully fused intense, brutal martial discipline with deep, uncompromising spiritual devotion.
He dedicates a lot of ink to the Templar ideal. He talks about how during the Crusades they fought for the absolute preservation of divine order.
They were famous for refusing to retreat in battle, knowing their physical sacrifice would inspire others and secure the line.
They weren't fighting for land, political power, or personal wealth. Their violent actions on the battlefield were a direct physical manifestation of their spiritual beliefs.
They prayed as fervently as they swung their swords.
Riker is basically telling his readers this is the exact mindset you need to survive today.
You need to be a modern-day Templar, standing firm and holding the line against modern heresies in your workplace, your home, and your local community.
But he also issues a severe warning about what happens if you fail to maintain that strict Templar discipline.
He introduces a terrifying psychological concept called the spiritual neglect cascade.
Let's break that down, because it's a really powerful way of looking at mental health. How does a cascade start?
It's the idea that spiritual and psychological decay doesn't happen overnight with one massive failure. It starts with a microscopic compromise.
A man decides to sleep in and miss a small morning prayer.
He skips a meditation session. He lets a resentful thought linger.
But those tiny, seemingly insignificant neglects compound over time like interest on a debt.
The spiritual muscle atrophies. The man becomes slightly more prone to anger. He starts snapping at his wife. His relationships begin to fray.
He turns to alcohol to cope with the friction, and eventually he slides into ultimate, inescapable despair.
And he points to the massive, undeniable spike in deaths of despair among middle-aged men.
Suicides, drug overdoses, alcohol-related liver diseases as the horrific proof of this cascade in action.
He cites a 2020 Brookings Institution study on this exact phenomenon.
Riker argues that these men aren't just dying from physical ailments or economic anxiety. They are dying from a profound lack of meaning, a total loss of identity, and a spiritual void.
The spiritual void literally manifests as physical death.
Which naturally leads to the final and most practical section of the book, Part 6, Reclaiming Leadership and Purpose.
Riker knows that if he just leaves his readers angry at the world and aware of the statistics, he hasn't helped them.
He wants to give them a rigid, actionable framework to rebuild their lives.
He calls this the purpose pyramid.
The purpose pyramid is the architectural core of his solution. He says that at the very base, the foundation of a man's life must be built entirely on duty and honor.
That is the bedrock.
Above that is provision and protection. And at the very top of the pyramid is success, happiness, and pleasure.
His point is that if you try to build your life starting at the top, if you chase success, money, and pleasure without a foundation of duty and honor, the pyramid will completely collapse under its own weight, and your life becomes hollow.
To vividly illustrate what a life built on duty looks like, he uses three powerful historical models of masculine strength.
First, he looks at the legendary polar explorer Ernest Shackleton.
The story of the Endurance is unbelievable. Shackleton's ship gets completely crushed by Antarctic ice, leaving him and his crew stranded in the most hostile environment on Earth.
Exactly. And Shackleton managed to keep his entire crew alive, maintaining their physical and mental survival for over a year on the ice.
But Riker points out that Shackleton didn't achieve this through brute physical dominance or tyranny.
He achieved it through a profound, unbreakable sense of duty to his men and by enforcing strict unity and routine.
It's a lesson that true masculine leadership is about managing morale, taking ultimate responsibility, and putting the survival of the group above your own comfort.
Then he brings in Viktor Frankl, the brilliant psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor who wrote Man's Search for Meaning.
Frankl observed firsthand in the concentration camps that the men who survived weren't necessarily the most physically fit.
They were the men who had a why, a profound reason to live, whether it was a loved one or unfinished work.
Frankl proved that the primary drive in human life isn't pleasure, but the pursuit of meaning.
Riker uses Frankl to show that true strength is the ability to find purpose, even in the most horrific, unjust suffering.
And finally, he mentions Hugh Glass, the legendary frontiersman who was mauled by a grizzly bear, abandoned by his companions, and left for dead.
Glass crawled for hundreds of miles through hostile territory with a broken leg and rotting wounds, driven purely by the will to survive and exact justice.
Riker uses Glass as the ultimate primal symbol of adaptability, grit, and raw survival.
He uses these three men, Shackleton, Frankl, and Glass, to completely invert the modern definition of success.
He's arguing that the peak of the masculine experience isn't a life of luxury and the absence of pain, but the absolute mastery of suffering through duty.
And he ends the book with very specific, hard-hitting commands for the listener to start building that mastery immediately.
He tells men to embrace what he calls the discomfort curve.
He argues that biological and spiritual growth only happens when you actively lean into discomfort.
You have to set ambitious goals, seek out physical challenges like lifting heavy weights or martial arts, and utterly reject the modern conveniences that lead to quiet desperation.
He also demands that men stop complaining about the culture on the internet and actually step up to take leadership roles in their local physical communities.
He points out a staggering statistic from a 2020 Pew Research Center study.
Only 30% of local government positions, school boards, city council, zoning committees are currently held by men.
Riker says this massive leadership vacuum at the local level is being filled by chaos and ideological dysfunction.
And men need to get off the sidelines, run for office, and enforce order in their own backyards.
His final and perhaps most immediate piece of advice is a brutal assessment of our relationship with technology.
He orders his readers to immediately delete social media.
He calculates the math.
Yeah.
If the average person spends over 2 hours a day on social media, that adds up to roughly 5 entire years of their life wasted doom scrolling by the time they reach 70.
He shares a story of a reader who deleted his apps, endured the dopamine withdrawal, and reclaimed his mind, using that recovered time to read philosophy, get in profound physical shape, and build a profitable business.
It is an uncompromising command to reclaim your time and attention.
It truly is an intense, unapologetic call to action from page 1 to the very end.
And as we wrap up this incredibly deep dive into the material, I want to reiterate our framework from the beginning.
We've spent the last hour exploring the specific, highly charged worldview of Conrad Riker in his book Against the Heresy.
We highly encourage you, the listener, to think critically about this material, to question the premises, and to analyze the arguments presented.
Absolutely. We are looking at the architecture of the ideas.
And if we zoom out and connect this massive ideological text to the bigger picture of our society right now, this raises a deeply important lingering question.
One that I want to leave you to mull over.
The question is this: even if you vehemently disagree with Conrad Riker's political framework, his religious views, or his historical interpretations, we still have to look at the massive, undeniable empirical rise in deaths of despair, suicide, and profound loneliness among modern men.
Does this undeniable data indicate that our society has successfully dismantled traditional initiation rituals and male support structures without putting anything viable or healthy in their place?
If the old system of traditional masculinity is gone, what exactly are we building right now to ensure the next generation of men doesn't fall entirely through the cracks into radicalization or despair?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this raises an important question.
That is a profound, incredibly heavy question to leave on, and one that demands an answer, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum.
As a reminder, our goal today was to impartially report on the complex ideas within this highly charged source material.
If you found this breakdown valuable, if it challenged you or helped you understand a different perspective, please like and subscribe to the show right now so we can keep bringing you these deep dives.
And again, don't just take our word for it. If you want to read the source material and analyze the text for yourself, head over to Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy Against the Heresy.
Men as defenders of divine order and truth.
Be sure to follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack.
And as requested by the author in his preface, leave a 5-star review if the book resonated with your journey.
Thanks for listening. Keep questioning everything, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.